Let's go ahead and get started. It's about 2:01. For those of you logged in, thank you for joining us for DDL's second webinar, where we have Dr. Patrick Lowenthal, who is going to be talking to us today about using live synchronous web meetings in asynchronous online courses. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Florence Martin. I am the president for the Division of Distance Learning this year for AECT. And this spring, we are hoping to host a series of webinars. We hosted one in January. So Dr. Lowenthal's webinar is our second one. And we actually have speakers lined up for March, April, and May. So I hope you continue to join us. And if for some reason you're not able to join us, we will also make sure that we are able to record these webinars and share it through the AECT Facebook group. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lowenthal, who will briefly introduce himself and then take us into his presentation.
Great. Hi, everyone. So the title of this talk, this is something kind of that I've done research on in an article and done some kind of presentations already. So I'm trying to take something that I've done before and then kind of add a little something in the end. So my mind approaching this was we'd have about 45 minutes to chat about using synchronous live meetings in online courses. And I was going to really start by talking about kind of my own research and a study that I've done, then kind of go into what are some other ways besides the way that I've been doing it to use synchronous web meetings, and then kind of just open it up for questions. And so valuing everyone's time, I think it's scheduled for an hour in my mind, 45 minutes. But like a good academic, you know, I grow to the size of my cage. So I'll keep talking sometimes. So you just have to shut me up. All right. So I'm going to, let's get this show going. So the original paper that I wrote on this was called Happy Hour. And I'll talk later a bit about why. But I'm really interested in using live synchronous web meetings, whether we call them webinars, you name it, synchronous communication. All right, so I always like to start with a little bit about me. Go Broncos, Blue. I sometimes even will start a talk by asking what people even know about Boise, Idaho. People like to, you know, you tell them Idaho, they think Iowa, they think all kinds of things. Or they think about a blue football field, and we love our blue football field, but we like to think that we're more than a blue football field. But I specifically like to kind of focus on my background, as I really see myself as an educator first, and a researcher second. I love to research, and this talk is kind of focused on research, but my background really was as an instructional designer, an instructional developer, a faculty developer. And so I'm always trying to think how we pull in research theory and practice. And so a plug for AECT, for anyone who's joining us who maybe doesn't even know what AECT is, or DDL, we throw these acronyms around. AECT is the longest standing EdTech organization in the US or the world. ISTE gets a lot of fanfare, has bigger numbers because it's really focused on K-12, where AECT, from my perspective, is really brings people in from K-12, from corporate industry, nonprofits, higher education, and really focuses on that kind of intersection of research, theory, and practice. And so if you don't know what AECT is, my guess is most of you do, but if you don't, please take some time and learn some more. Specifically, this is hosted by the Division of Distance Learning, so DDL. I spent some time doing some service for DDL for a number of years. DDL is my favorite SIG, or I guess is division. And so while this webinar format is new, it's something that I would love to see everyone to keep taking part in. And so for me, this was exciting to be offered, and I'm honored to be here. So my website's there if you're interested in other kind of noise about me. My Twitter handle, though I seem to tweet less and less these days. I tend to just share stuff that I think is neat. So this talk is about an article that was published in the Online Learning Journal. I'm not going to read through this abstract here, but this talk is kind of about this article. So if you really just were interested in the article, you could go right here. And maybe someone could copy that into the chat or just Google it. Another plug would be the Journal of Online Learning journal is from the Online Learning Consortium. So basically, it merged with Merlot's journal, but it is an open access journal that also focuses on research theory and practice. So I would make a plug to spend some time checking out the Online Learning journal and contributing as well. So this talk is really about kind of, I think I call it a design case. I don't know if that's the right word. Is I really was interested in the instructional strategy of using live meetings, because I would find myself at a conference and I would hear people say stuff like, you know, it's against the rules at my institution to have live meetings. It is asynchronous. That's what online is. And they did it with just that voice. And you would find people that they kind of really feel like, no, it's breaking the rules. You cannot bring synchronous stuff into the online classroom. And I've struggled with that over the years. And so that's kind of where I kind of came into this. And I'm going to kind of give you the backdrop of my story. And so I tend to research mostly how people communicate using emerging technology. So specifically, I'm really interested in this concept of social presence, but also identity, community. But social presence really dates back to the 70s. And people were really interested as telecommunication was taking off, was how it impacted the way people communicated. And so Short and his colleagues in London, they were doing research during the 70s, and they were really interested in social presence, or what they saw as the quality or state of being there, or people sometimes also talk about this being real. And so when two people are communicating, or two or more, you know, how do you get a sense that the other one is there? How do you get the sense that the other one's a real person? So, so this is kind of the backdrop of where a lot of my research is. And so I'm often interested in investigating, well, how do we do this? Because with online learning, you know, we often have this image of students who are isolated and alone, shaking in the corner, and that they all need virtual hugs. I'm not convinced that's totally true, but I do think that social presence is important for all people when they communicate, and that it is more important for some than others. And so my research kind of investigates, okay, if this is important, well, how do we do it? And, you know, and I'm also really interested in kind of the ins and outs and the messiness of it. And so the idea, at least with Short and his colleagues, and it's kind of persisted, is this idea that there's certain communication technologies have certain affordances and restraints. And so face-to-face communication really looks pixelated here, but face-to-face communication, the idea was, and kind of still is by many, is that it's the ideal. It's the gold standard. And so you get more presence, intimacy, immediacy, or realness, there-ness with face-to-face. Video, a little less. Then you get audio, and then you kind of think of written. This is very oversimplified, but you get this idea. But from this kind of really came with this idea that video is king. I mean, in much, you know, face-to-face is king, which we're face-to-face here in ways. But from the early days on, we still have this idea, and there's almost an obsession with online learning, is that, well, we have to use video. But it has to be asynchronous, because what if it was synchronous? It breaks the rules. And so I'm really interested in this space of how we use technology to improve social presence. So that's kind of the backdrop of me, why I got into this, why I'm here today talking about this stuff. So the context. So I started using video, and I've done collected data, presented on some. I like to collect data and write papers and then never publish them. They're like half written. So I have lots of these. And so one of them was on a study that really was interested in video, but specifically the uses. How do you use video, right? It's not that video just magically establishes social presence. It's rather how you use it and what are the ways that we use it. And I'm really interested in that messiness. And so I did a study where I really looked at the main things was my use of video announcements, instructional videos, and video feedback in online courses. And during that time, I was starting to use synchronous video again, and this kind of came up. And so it was around 2008-ish. I specifically started using basically Adobe Connect for virtual office hours. I was, at the time, I'm trying to remember, I think I was finishing up at Regis University, going to the University of Colorado, Denver. I was an adjunct, and I was really trying to use Adobe Connect for synchronous office hours. And so And so that's really what this talk today is about my use of kind of trying to improve office hours, if you will, or what I now call happy hour. So with that, I really doesn't want me to use my keyboard. All right. So I started using in 2008 video office hours. And so basically every Saturday morning, and I have a full-time job. I was a doc student. I'm teaching online. I would go in Saturday morning at, have 9 o'clock virtual office hours, and I'd have them in Adobe Connect. Could be in any tool. But at the time, that was the one we used at the institution. And I'd have these weekly office hours. And I'd find that the first meeting, about 50% of the class would show up. So let's say the class had 25, 26 people. I'd have 12, 13 show up. And then the next week, I might have 3, and then 1, and then, maybe 2 if I'm lucky. And honestly got to the point where I almost hoped they didn't show up, because but there was always that 1 or 2 that kept showing up. And it was just like, oh gosh, is this really, especially being an adjunct, is this a good use of my time? And I wasn't convinced it was. But deep down, I also knew from other research I've done that while we all have different social presence needs, that for those who were showing up, this was really important. And we always talk about office hours, and this issue of students not showing up for office hours isn't something that just happens with, online learning. I mean, it's face-to-face. It has a long history of students not showing up. And so we could always talk more about that. But I basically stopped using live virtual software, office hours. I'm like, nope, not worth it. So then a couple years later, I was working at Boise State, and there was, I think actually the impetus was we had a question in our course evaluation that I think said, does the instructor use synchronous technology? And it's funny, we don't have that question anymore. But at the time, I'm like, darn it, all right, let's think more about this. Because it's not just that the technology is good or bad. It's obviously the designer in me. It's like, well, how are we using it? And so, the birth of happy hour. And so I stole happy hour from a colleague here, Krishna, who's in our engineering, and he actually would do these live meetings. And I'll talk later than what he does, but he called it happy hour. And I thought that was fabulous. So it gives a very different feel than office hours. Also, when we say office hours, there's this baggage wrapped up in it. And I wasn't interested in that baggage. I was interested in thinking new and having students approach it differently. So based on kind of my previous experience, some of my initial assumptions were that synchronous sessions can add value to online courses. I really believe that. I thought that also they don't have to necessarily be every week. We get in this kind of mindset, even with online discussions, asynchronous. We get this idea that we have to have a discussion every week. And it's like, well, no, let's break the mold here. Let's color outside the lines. And then I really started thinking about, well, couldn't synchronous sessions be optional and still students might attend? Because that's often the argument, is that you can't require it. You're breaking the rules. You can't do that. And so for me, it was like, well, all right, well, could I make them optional? And does that necessarily mean I can't get more than 1 or 2 students? But I was really okay. If maybe, let's say 1 or 2 show up, then fine. I'm committed to this. I thought that also we have students. So I should say that I teach in a fully online program. We offer a master's, certificates, an EDS, Ed Specialist, and a doctorate in educational technology, fully online. There's no requirement to come to campus. As a result, we have students all over the world. There's not one semester that I've taught that I don't have some student in some part of Europe, Asia, you name it. And so, I recognize that finding the right time zones and finding the right time to do live meetings can be a challenge. But I really also thought through, aren't there ways that we can do them at different times? And even with that, if I just focus on the US, we have students in East Coast and Pacific, right? Let's say they're usually teachers or they're working professionals, so it needs to be later. But could I do one at 7 and one at 5? And, are there ways that I can do that? And so, but also we get stuck with this idea that, everything has to be convenient for all students. And, I've written at one point I wrote an article about, doing it in your jammies, and something we should, taking a course that is online in your jammies, and other things we should never say, and things I think get wrapped up in this, oh, you can get your degree, you can do it in your jammies, you can, and it's like, well, does it have to be always convenient? My experience being a grad student, working on, having a full-time job, there's nothing convenient about it, really. And so, I mean, I don't even remember what it was like to have a convenient life as a student. I guess it probably was like elementary school. And so it doesn't have to be convenient per se. It doesn't need to be unnecessarily challenging, but and so there's this idea of, well, virtual office hours sounds like, it sounds like that thing that only people with problems show up for. It sounds like that. It sounds optional. It sounds really like it's something that I don't need. And so what's a way to rebrand it and think differently about it? So I call this a design case. It doesn't really fit neatly into design-based research or as a design case traditionally, because I'm really interested in kind of how, almost an instructional strategy across multiple courses. How can I use live meetings more effectively? So, so with that, my first iteration of it was I added 3 to 4 happy hour sessions per course. So a semester-long course that was 15 weeks, I'd have 4 sessions. And then during the summer, which 7-week courses, I'd have 3. And so the idea was it would be like 3 weeks in, I'd have the first happy hour, and then another 3 weeks, I'd have another happy hour, and so forth. And it's still kind of left with the last 5 weeks of the semester, there wasn't anything, but that was kind of, given the project nature of my courses, usually they're set off and it worked well. There's nothing magical about 3 to 4, and we'll come back to that. I set the dates and times. I identify them before the course started. I didn't try to do a doodle and ask what works for everyone. To me, Wednesday nights work good. My kid often has soccer that I coach on Tuesday and Thursdays, so Wednesday was kind of like a safe space. And I would, basically have like the first one at 4:30 and the next one at 5, the next one at 5:30, and then 6. And the hope was that maybe someone couldn't attend every one, but they could at least attend 1 or 2. I added those to the syllabus. So when someone signed up for the course, they knew that attending happy hour was optional, but that these are the dates. I added information and links about it in the modules. So it wasn't just something haphazard. It was, this is an activity for this week. I would then post a reminder and basically in the announcement in LMS and send it out the day of, just reminding people. I still maintain that they're optional. I don't think that they need to be optional, and we can talk about that, about whether you can or should require attendance to things like this. But I did record these, and so I would record them and upload them to YouTube as unlisted, so I could get some tracking. And then I'd set the days, so I talked a little bit about that, alternate times. So the second iteration, so this idea of thinking about design-based research is you have this kind of instructional intervention and that you want to try it out. But the idea is, when do the things we do work great the first time? Even driven by theory, right? It is this idea that you need to iteratively improve what you do. And so for me, that's the work of an instructional designer. That's really the work of an online educator, is that, we have to keep iteratively trying to improve the stuff that we do. And so, so for me, during the second iteration of this, I remained, the happy hours remained optional, but students during, and I think that was why during this one study where I looked at video announcements, instructional videos, and feedback, the interviews, people kept giving me suggestions on how to improve happy hour. And I kept being like, that's not the focus of this study. And they really wanted to talk about it. And so that's where some of this feedback came back, is they really wanted to earn points. They love that it was optional, has strong feelings that it shouldn't be required, but that they were like, well, why can't I earn some points? And so, so basically I allowed them the ability to earn part of their participation points as happy hour. So rather than just all asynchronous discussions, they could get 5 points for each happy hour they attended. So they also recommended, we're a Google App school, so adding a Google calendar invite, and basically I would add them to them. So they have one more thing reminding them, because, best intentions, we're busy people. My students, working adults, they forget these things all the time. So it's one thing for me to go in the LMS and post an announcement that still pings them. It's another thing if they have their calendar synced for them to get an invite on their phone or whatever. Students also shared, though, that they didn't want it just to be question and answer. They felt like that was just kind of a waste of their time, and that it was almost more of a gamble. They didn't know, what if there were no good questions? Maybe it would be a waste of their time. And so they really wanted an instructional component. And so basically I added a 15-minute something. And so it depends on the course, what that something is and which happy hour it is. Some courses I have it planned out. All right, we're going to talk about, with this doctoral course I'm teaching on, let's say, APA and writing conventions and this and that. Others, it might be based on what's come up at that point in the semester. I've graded 3 weeks of your work. These are things I'm seeing. It could even be, hey, this came something in the news that was really interesting. And so, but there was some type of mini lecture instructional component, not necessarily lecture, but and then also because some students never could attend, maybe it's Wednesday night bowling league, you name it. I would always post, when I post that reminder, I would ask them ahead of time, hey, what are questions you have? I will then try to answer those questions. And so, then they could watch the recording and they could still take part if they wanted to. So overview of use and changes. So, 2008, 2011, used weekly office hours. It was a nightmare, except for that one or two who really liked it. But overall, it was not a successful use of my time. Phase 2 really kind of thought through the first iteration, collected, interviews, did some anecdotal reports, and really just tracked attendance, because that was one key metric to me is, are they even showing up? Because that shows me whether they think it's valuable. From those results, basically, it became clear that, I need to focus on key times. Really should be optional. I really wanted to rebrand it, but also try to always record it and really make it feel like it's a part of the course. It's not just some add-on that, that doesn't feel meaningful. I mean, that's what happens with office hours, really, right? It's what happens outside of course, the class. It's, you can set up an appointment or come by that one day a week, but it doesn't feel like it's an integral part of the course. I was really trying to make happy hour, this time where we come together and talk about the course, an integral part of the course. It was always, happy hour is always 1 hour. If I'm teaching more than one course, I would stack the happy hours. So one's 5 to 6, the other's 6 to 7. If I'm teaching more than one section of a course, I would merge those happy hours. But when the hour's up, I'm done. If students want to set one-on-one times, we still could. Every now and then, it happened more with the doc students, I might stay after and chat with one or two if they need it. But during the second iteration, collected more data through specific surveys. And, they really recommended using Google Calendar or other types of invite reminders, add an instructional component, earn points, right? Just because it's optional doesn't mean that you can't earn points. Allow students who can't attend a way to participate. So enrollment, so I did it in 3 courses that I taught. Actually, I do it in every course I teach now. But in this study or data collection phase, Internet for Educators, which was a course on web development, HTML, CSS, Dreamweaver I taught. Online course design, another one I taught, and then doctoral studies orientation. And so long story short, I found that, my numbers increased dramatically. And so I would find that, sometimes I would have 50% of the class showing up for at least one happy hour, often a third of the class, a quarter to a third of the class showing up for every one. And so for me, just in terms of attendance, in terms of my time, I was stoked. And as far as like points, the points are, out of 1,000 points, they can get 20 points for attending happy hour. So the points really are nothing. And so this alone kind of made me feel like, okay, this is worth my time. And then also there's students on my evaluations constantly bring up happy hour for the ones who love it. It's not right for everyone, but for the ones who love it, it comes up in my evaluations every semester by at least one student. There's a few that love it, who would just, because they're missing something in the traditional asynchronous program. So some questions I asked them about just their perceptions, so to what degree do you agree with these statements? I tended to learn the course material, so strongly agree, pretty strong. And you can actually see all of these are really strong. The number 2, though, reasons was I wanted to know my instructor better. I think we focus so much on this kind of learner-centered, and we want to flatten the classroom and make the teacher God on the side. But the reality, I strongly believe that you can still have a learner-centered environment where students really still value the expertise the teacher brings to the table. If not, they can spend time on YouTube and textbooks. There's something significant about that student-teacher interaction. It's Tinto's framework talks about it when we think of retention. Chickering-Amson's 7 principles. It comes up over and over again, is that this relationship with the teacher is important. and that the other high ones, they thought it was a good use of their time. But overall, this was music to my ears. This was reassurance that, okay, this is working well. Some students are tending to get their questions answered or to learn more about course requirements. So that first happy hour usually is kind of what you would do in a face-to-face class. You'd go over the syllabus, you'd go over the main projects in the class, you'd ask for questions. And so with this too, though, what I'd say is the classes, and I've still found this to be true, Internet for Educators is a highly technical course. And so I found that attendance was always really high with that. Overall, I would say, while these numbers aren't super strong, my doctoral studies class almost always are really high. In fact, I think last time I taught it, it was like 100% for everyone, the whole, all four. So, or three, it's during the summer. But basically, so my point being is that the type of course it is, and in this case, how technical it was also, or difficult, helped kind of increase attendance. All right, I'd missed some questions. All right. I have to leave. Whose line is it anyway? Approach to awarding points? Sure. Yep, definitely. Will references to reading and authors be available? So what I will say is I will go back, and the article that was published has references, or if you want more, I can send you all kinds of things. So happy to. So okay, so a couple other things, and then I want us to kind of talk about other uses of live synchronous technology, and then I have a Google Doc where I want us to try to collaborate and brainstorm on some things here. So also ask them just, why did you, some open-ended questions. Why did you attend? What would you change? Because I'm really trying to iteratively change what I do. In fact, I'm playing with this semester, and last semester was, what if I only offer 3 happy hours rather than 4? What if it's consistently 3? And so, I'm trying to continually tweak this. So I don't know. The question is, here's my email. I don't know if I'm following that. And yeah, so the article, we can include it. So we're going to come back to this question about high school, because I think it's a good one where we can get into this a little more. All right, so when people talk about why they attended, you're right, it's personal interaction, it's satisfaction, useful information, timing, blah, blah, blah. We're going to go through some quotes, and then we'll kind of open this question up some more. Did I do it right? So it was a great way to connect with the instructor and students. There's a difference for being live. And what I'll say too is, especially with Adobe Connect, I mean, I think almost all of these tools now have a mobile app. So I'd have students sometimes at their kids' hockey game, and they're listening in. So even being live, if they're even not able to easily interact, they found value. Liked the opportunity to see my classmates, instructor live, face-to-face, if you will. So other things talked about, just being satisfied with happy hour, appreciated that. That's the thing is, students often find that, wow, you took all this time. And I found that this actually simplifies my time, because especially sometimes when I'm emailing students or problems come up, it can be like, why don't we talk about this next week at happy hour? And so there's these set times where I know we're going to come together, or maybe they can't attend, but I can still talk about it. So really enjoyed attending happy hour. I think it's a great idea to gain additional, why else did you come, or what would make it valuable, to be kept in the loop. This especially came up with the doc students who, have additional anxiety about what they might be missing. So I was only able to attend the first one, and this is where it goes down to Wednesdays, or this, I have a toddler, East Coast time. And so there's always some struggles with time zone. And it's one of those things that, there are ways that you could offer, and we'll talk about this in the end, but sometimes when people do class presentations, they may offer 2 different times. So there's a noon and a 5 p.m. or something. I teach an online workshop here every semester on training faculty to teach online. And with that, we always do introduce them to synchronous technologies, and we have to schedule times throughout the day, multiple times. And so, so there are other ways to kind of address that. incentives. The reason I said that I wouldn't attend without points was because I wouldn't have gone. So basically the points get them to show up for the first one, but then they, reported that once they see the value of it, it's really not about the points. So, if points weren't given for it, I might not have attended. I mean, this is this idea. So then things that always come up are about like why using Adobe Connect. That's just what we use in my program. We're a Blackboard school and we have Collaborate. I don't use Hangout because it's just a pain to record, and I always wanted to record. This semester, because Connect, Adobe's changed their price point, I've actually used Collaborate for the first time, but because Collaborate works with our Moodle system. But the technology doesn't matter. There's always going to be some technology problems. There's always, Idaho is like 49th for the slowest broadband, I think, in this country. So it's, there's always problems. I usually come to work when I do these because the internet, it's a little better, and my cat's not walking across. Actually, people like seeing my cat. It's more, I live in this small house with my wife or kids are watching TV in the next room, and the sound becomes an issue. So it might be helpful to have students submit questions prior to, so this is what prompted me to do that. And then, it'd be great to have participants ask about their primary concerns. So there are ways that you could add in some polling and surveys to even get into some more stuff here. So I'm kind of bored at this stuff now. But this is a student who, because I start with basically the first 15 minutes of happy hour is just open questions, and then it goes into 15 minutes or so of a lesson, and then it's kind of wide open the remaining 30 minutes. Every now and then we finish early. No reason to go through if there are no more questions, but often find ways to just fill the space. And so this first bullet, though, talks about how some students get wrapped up in their own questions that everyone else, it's not really applicable, and so they found that kind of difficult. So that's part of that's the idea of knowing what's appropriate to talk, in a full class setting, or what's something we do on the side. So lessons learned, future changes. For me, one of the biggest things is to get students involved, so it's not so me talking at them. This is, and if you read some of the research on VoiceThread, sometimes people are just hesitant. And so, you really sometimes have to single them out, because I've given wide open, hey, who wants to share something? So let's say in the graphic design for learning course I'm teaching right now, someone could take control and show something in Photoshop. Hey, how'd you do this? And so doing more of that, but finding structured ways. Ask for questions for students who can't come, but specifically, rather even than an announcement, kind of even single out, especially students who are struggling, who you might know, maybe there's something that would really help them. Some other lessons learned that I'm trying to do more of is identify topics and set up some of these, instructional components ahead of time. Some of them, it's a very appropriate to wing it and go with what's going on in the class. Other times I know and I can prep for it, or I could bring in a guest speaker. Secret sessions, and reminding myself that they don't have to be required to be useful. I mean, to me, it's like if you leave this talk with anything, is knowing that you don't have to require them, and there are ways that people might show up. And so I think that that's, if anything else. But that they can be recorded. And, for students who I've never had much pushback because I give extra credit. But if someone really was like, well, I watched the recording, why can't I get my points? I would basically reply, okay, write a 500-word summary. And, something that then they're going to be like, oh, I don't want to do that for 5 points. But that's the way I would handle something like this. They don't have to be every week. That's another thing to really kind of think about, when you think about live meetings, is they don't have to be every week. They could be once. They could be at the end of the semester. There's lots of ways you can do it. So, and that, this idea that students still really value points, right? And we've kind of set up this culture, I guess. Okay, so I'm going to look at the questions, but what I want us to do is go to this Google Doc and try to flush out some ideas. But I want to first look at some of these questions going on here. All right, do you use it for student-led discussion? So here, I'm going to even bring this over so we jump right in here. So my hope, if you're at a computer and convenient, if you're on an iPad, it might not work, is that you can jump on here and start adding your ideas down here. And because some of the ways, as far as student discussions go, with my doctoral students, I've had them like do introductions, and that can take an hour right there. And so for me, I don't use them for student discussions, but I know that I've had people use them for study groups. So for instance, let's say you have a project, let's say that you have a group project and there's groups of 4. And so I've seen people do them for where you have to basically have the students come together and they have discussions. And sometimes I've seen them teacher moderated. Other times I've seen people use them where they're not teacher moderated, or other ways where, all right, you guys are a group, you have to basically work out your norms and your other things, and then come together and meet me, the instructor, and we're going to talk through your plan for the semester. What's your project? What's your whatever. And so that's the way, Kelly, that I've seen other people use it. There's also a colleague of mine, she teaches French. And so she does these one-on-one where it's basically, it's part of a quiz. You have to basically prove that you can speak French. And so you have a discussion with the instructor. And so that's more of a one-on-one teacher-student. But I've definitely seen people do it student-student. I tend to not. But at the same time, I do have group projects. And I know students have, after they've worked on something or they're working a group project, they will meet and like hang out together or Skype. So did I gather data from students who did not attend? I did not intentionally. I do through the student evaluations. There was a question, and so students who didn't attend, but so few had something to say about it that it wasn't a convenient time. That was the number one reason why they, the timing wasn't right. But there were a couple of students, and this came up in the interviews I did on videos, that not all students need all these virtual hugs. That's a lot of my research on social presence has shown that we all have different social presence needs. And so while some people really value this kind of happy hour thing, other people, it's not a good use of their time. I have colleagues, English is their second language. And so for them, they wouldn't feel comfortable as instructors having live sessions. They value the asynchronous nature. And so the last thing I'm trying to suggest is that every class needs to have synchronous web live meetings. I see it more that there's this toolbox, and this is a tool that we have that people aren't using enough. And I think that we're going to find using it more and more as the technology gets better, is that just because the early days, the first online course was like 1986. The first 20 years of online learning was asynchronous, and we're, the tools are getting so much better that I think that we need to find ways to use this more meaningful and systematically in our courses. But that doesn't mean it's for everyone. All right, I think that was kind of a long thing. So, all right, Stacy, one of the roles is director. All the classes have synchronous sessions, but I can't imagine how different the school would be if we didn't have them, right? So, I think what happens with K-12 is that there's more of a history that you have a schedule, right? Sometimes students are taking online courses at their high school during a certain period. But there is this idea that it's a Monday through Friday gig, where you almost find with adult learners, especially who are professionals working on their degree, that they want something they can do Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, or really just Sunday. And so I think that it gets harder with this side of inconvenience with adult learners, but also with K-12, you tend to have them in the same state, if not the same district. And so time zone issues aren't as much of an issue either. And I think there's more of a culture too with K-12 that says, well, you're required to do this. Attendance is required. Where I think we've really set up kind of this idea in higher ed, especially graduate higher ed, that we want to make it convenient. We don't want to inconvenience anyone. And so I think that kind of sometimes limits us because sometimes it's very valuable for you to have this face-to-face time. So, all right, Blackboard. So Blackboard Collaborate being horrible. The new one, I don't know if you've used the new non-Java HTML5. I think it's pretty great. Or I think it's very great. That's probably too glowing. It's very similar to Google Hangouts these days. I would say that. Well, actually, I could totally talk about animal presence. That's a whole nother thing, because I think that it's people, they get to know who you are. So the benefit of me doing this at home is that they do. My kid almost always, my younger one will walk in, or my cat will walk across, put her face in my butt or something totally inappropriate. But it just kind of loosens it and makes it, less formal, which for me is important. For some people, they like the formality and they don't want to do any, right. They want to wear a tie. And I mean, I've been in a sweatshirt where my hair is crazy and people have commented about my hair. Like, did I brush it that day? I mean, so it just depends on, all right, you guys are going here. I want to jump over here. I'm going to jump back to the questions. All right, so virtual office hours was the way that I talked about that I do it. And so any of you can fill this out. I do happy hours virtual office hours where they're not every week, but you could imagine them being every week. So the first day of class, and this could be if you have time zone issues, you could have 2 times, but to me, it could be something that, you require, you don't require, or maybe there's just extra credit, but you show up for an hour and a half and we're going to all introduce each other. We're going to go over the syllabus. We're going to have that kind of meet and greet that you do often with your face-to-face courses. Take that time, right? So one of the things that I've seen that Joni Dunlop, co-author on the paper, dissertation advisor, Joni's wonderful. We do lots of great stuff, or she helps. I do great stuff with her. One of the things that she's done is guest presenters where she's had, let's say she has 5 guest presenters for that semester, and they are identified ahead of time. They come in and the presentation's live. And I think she did something where like you were required to attend 3 out of 5. And so the timings could be different. And so there's different ways that you can require, right, how many you would do. But she would basically have the guest presenters come in and give a talk. She would record it, and then she'd have this archive, right? And so then the next time she'd teach it, she'd try to get a different group. And so she's built up this kind of collection of guest presenters. But you can also imagine having guest presenters come in to be like judges. So you can imagine like you got to do, it's a business class or something, and you got to do a pitch of, or you can imagine grant, right? So this is a pretend grant committee, and we all have to write a grant or pitch an idea of we want money to do this for the classroom. And then the guest presenters vote on who gets it, right? Or it's like the Olympics, they put up their score. You get a 9, you get an 8, right? Or, so there's lots of different ways we can play on this. Debates, right? And this works better for some classes than others, but you can imagine a course on ethics or something. Sometimes debating is a good way to get people, and you can do some of these same things, obviously asynchronous, or you can even do them with asynchronous video, right? This group has to record their video, but there's something about thinking on your feet live that's very powerful. I do want to say though that one of the best books I've read recently, where is it? Quiet. It's about how we privilege certain types of learners, the extrovert, the loud, and so I get fired up when I do these things, but I'm very introverted, very kind of antisocial where it's, and so for me, I don't want us to focus too much on just giving one type of activity that privileges one type of student. But class, I went off. See, I go on squirrel and then I chase things. So class presentations. So this could be done. Definitely team projects would be one way to do this. The nice thing about team projects is then rather than sitting through, let's say, 25 presentations, you might just have 5 because you have groups of 5. But this could be something where you even could give them choice on asynchronous or synchronous. And, maybe there's points if you do it live. But this kind of at the end of your class, that last week of class, you could definitely have some class presentations, right, that are required. And if you are requiring this stuff, I think the key is to make sure that you have this stuff in the syllabus where there's no surprises, there's no ahas, gotcha, right? It's that they know it's required, or they know that it's required, but if they don't attend, they can still get an A in the course, let's say. They're not going to get a solid 95. And so that's one of the things, too, is you can build in, well, for this assignment to get the full 100%, 5% of it's that you showed up live and present. I don't know, but you get the idea. Class presentations, I've done pitchakachas, time talks, study sessions. So this was something that, and it's going to kind of combine these next 2 that you guys have here, study sessions and student led. But Krishna, who I stole happy hour from, what he does is he has these kind of midterm exam things and final where, they can show up and do basically study sessions before the exam. So there's like a, previous old exam he uses, and that students actually help solve the problems for other students. And so it's student-led, but it's student-led to help solve these math problems, right, or whatever. And so this is something that he does. But you can imagine other ways to do structured study sessions. And so these could be things that you set up, or that you facilitate, or that you just don't do it all and encourage. I mean, there's lots of ways to kind of think about how you might do these things. So student-led sessions, you could definitely have students. I mean, when you think about even, so today we have this, it snowed a bit. School wasn't canceled, but even with your traditional, let's say K-12 teachers, even if you're a traditional face-to-face classroom teacher, you're going to find yourself more and more using technology, probably having to find ways sometimes to have even live sessions to make up for snow days. Or the world's changing, and I think that the walls between fully face-to-face and fully online are blending. I think the walls between fully asynchronous and synchronous are blending, and so I think it's great for all students, but you think teacher education students to have experience, giving a webinar or doing a week-long session that involves some type of synchronous stuff, definitely. The studio show and tell, totally. You could think of, art classes and art critiques, or like, my first message design course, we would all present our stuff on the computer and we would walk around, right? You can imagine it's that same type of thing where it's, so I teach a course on web development. So my final project, we could have this kind of, studio type of show and tell. And that could be where you bring in external people to even give feedback, right? So let's say you're training instructional designers. Bring in an instructional designer or two and give feedback, right? It could be, so my online course design class, I could have professionals come in and critique, let's say, your learning objectives. Instructional designers love to debate learning objectives. So, well, let's let them do it, right? Or, so there's lots of ways to kind of do this. So we talked a little bit about group project, but it is this idea that you can have these tools. You can have, first of all, group projects, but you can have synchronous meetings be a required part. It could be a required part for them to meet with you, or it could be one of the, let's say to go over a team agreement on norms, or it could be just a suggestion. You guys have to meet 5 times during your group project. You decide whether you do it by phone, this, that, the other. So we talked a little about exam review. All right, in the now. Definitely, current events, right? That kind of thing. You think about it's just where we are right now. I mean, we could talk about the Olympics. We could talk about anything, right? And you could find a way to bring, politics, all kinds of good stuff in, right? And so the hard thing about it's just like with the face-to-face class, you got to be careful what you ask for and setting up norms, sometimes controlling audio permissions, or they have to raise their hand, before they talk, other things. So oral exam, definitely. So oral exam, I talked about the foreign language, but you can imagine, wow, you guys are active. I got to jump back over questions. But you can imagine other things where, like one of the foundation core proficiencies, competencies at most universities is that you can communicate, right? And so so it's a written communication, with this oral communication. It's really important. And I think it's also sometimes important to be able to defend your ideas on the spot. And so it's problems sometimes we privilege, like I said, those quick learners where I think there are other learners that like the ability to reflect and take time. But there are ways that you can, oral exam could be great. You can imagine mock interviews. The list goes on, right? But what I hope is that this is getting you excited about, all right, well, what's a way that I might use one of these? And maybe it's not in your classes. Maybe it's working with other teachers. Maybe it's professional development. But I want to break us out of this mindset that we can't use live technology in our courses, that there aren't ways that we can make it meaningful and address still those issues of time zones and other things. And that I think moving forward, we're all going to use this stuff more. So we got to become more proficient at it. I'm amazed at how many meetings we'll have where a couple of my colleagues still can't get their mic to work, right? We got to get better than that. We have to model it for our students. We have to help them get better at it. So I'm going to pull the group chat over here and try to see if I can catch up, because it says 22 questions or messages. So Bill, I think you had a problem. I'm hoping you can follow the link above. Did I? Let's get back here. The link's here. I might not have shared it as fast as I should have or could have, or actually I might have shared it too fast. So my hope is that you guys can flush this out some more, right? Spend 5 minutes when you're done with this. Write out, a paragraph on one of these. Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Chris. All right. People still, collaborate. And actually, Blackboard's just fun to hate, so we can always spend time. And Zoom is something that people like a lot, too.
Patrick, would
Yes.
you like me to read through the questions and give you a couple?
Wonderful.
You're getting close to time. Okay, so here's one. Does anyone know of any free or inexpensive live captioning services for synchronous video chats?
I believe that Google Hangout now has live where you can make someone a captioner, but I've tried to even do it. It's a certain skill, and so I don't believe that there's any free. I'll let Tanya jump in. Looks like she might have some ideas, but usually I would say start with your institution, because I know with us, our institution will provide. I did a thing with one faculty member where literally the interpreter's sitting right next to me. I would do that a little differently again, but Tanya, jump in here.
I just saw a post from Marshall Jones, who is at Winthrop University, talking about this topic. He has a new setup in his office where he's using both of his screens. One of them has an active open Google Doc, and he's using the voice to text. Mm-hmm. So it live transcribes the discussion as it happens. I want to play with this. And when I saw that question, I was like, ooh, I want to share what Marshall's doing.
Wonderful. Antonia, Lisa just added the same thing. She said that Google Docs offers voice to text. So somebody might be able to open it up and use that. So that's great.
Yeah.
Another question from Bill. Is anyone applying findings to VR?
I'm not, as far as and I guess VR is really broad, so I would want to know more, but I would think that I mean, I think it just depends. It's something that I'm not seeing a lot done specifically with live meetings in VR. But other people, if you have ideas, chat away.
Okay, and so here's a question, Chris. I'm not quite sure when Chris posted this question. It says, "What about courses that are taught asynchronously, where there is no start or end date?"
I still think that, so let's take a MOOC. Let's say that there's a MOOC, and, usually with most asynchronous courses, there's still theoretically an end date, like maybe it's a calendar year, but let's say it's a MOOC. Let's say it's offered for 2018. And so you could imagine having, that's what people use tweet ups, and they'll do different things like that. You could imagine if you were teaching a MOOC, having, every quarter, a meeting or something like that, or you could find a way to, like they do with tweet-ups, other things, is actually encourage your users or require them to have their own meetings. So it's not teacher-driven, but it's community-driven or something. So I think there are other ways to do that.
Okay, I think those were the 3 questions that came through towards the end. Does anybody else have any other questions? We have about 5 minutes remaining. If there are no questions, any other last thoughts, Patrick? Oh, yeah.
This is recorded, and yes, you should be able to share. Is it on YouTube, and is it on indefinitely, or do you guys keep it up for a short period, or what's the?
It will be on YouTube. It'll be on my channel. I have a separate playlist for DDL webinars, and even after I die, that channel will probably still exist.
I don't know if that's a happy thought, but okay. You guys can contact me if you have any questions. I love to talk about this stuff. What I will say is, this idea of using Google Doc or crowdsourcing ideas, Joni Dunlap and I just published something in Open Praxis on it. The URL is there, but it's this idea of, imagine if I did this talk 4 other times, and I gave a little more time in that Google Doc, how all of a sudden we can crowdsource this, because collectively we all have, and we've all seen a lot of really good ideas, stuff that kind of is missed, right? Sometimes because the dominant voices at conferences or other things, where sometimes the practitioners who are teaching 10 courses a year, right, who know all these great things. And so crowdsourcing and leveraging our community, we should do more of. I will conclude by saying that join AECT, join DDL if you're not, because we would love to have you. I appreciate the time, and if you have questions, don't be strangers. I think also I will try. I think they said in the this article will be in the description. So if you're interested in that, so someone asked about references, and so, but if you want other stuff on that I might have written, reach out. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you very much for taking the time to do this webinar for us. And this session was recorded and it will be shared through the AECT group, Facebook group. So if you're part of that, you can access it from there, or if you email one of us, I'm sure we'll be glad to send you the link, and feel free to share it with colleagues, with students, to spread the wonderful work that Patrick is doing. Thank you, Patrick, again. And for those of you who are able to join in today, I hope to see several of you at the next session, which will be by Dr. Vanessa Denon. It's towards the end of March. We haven't finalized on a date, but look for announcements on the AECT Facebook page.
Each morning